Aloha, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Carolyn Hyman. I am the Vice President of Marketing and Communications for Aloha United Way, and I'm also our moderator today. We are here to introduce the findings of the latest ALICE report, ALICE in Hawaii 2022, Facts and Figures. The report could not have been produced without the vision and financial support of Bank of Hawaii Foundation. It's significant for a number of reasons, but I think it's best to understand really the history of the ALICE movement in Hawaii in order to understand the significance. So in 2009, United Way of Northern New Jersey struggled to understand economic hardship in one single county. From there, data was generated and it spread. Everyone wanted to understand populations locally, utilizing what became the ALICE framework. In 2016, Hawaii became one of the first 12 partner states for the United for ALICE movement. In 2017, the first state report was commissioned thanks to partners like Hawaii Community Foundation, Bank of Hawaii Foundation, and Kamehameha Schools. That first report was quickly followed. The AUW ALICE Fund was established in 2018, and in 2019, the first ALICE cohort, 10 nonprofits working collectively to move ALICE forward. 2020, the next ALICE report was published, and we all know what happened next. The pandemic hit. We pivoted, we changed, we adjusted, we moved forward. But the ALICE movement had been gaining momentum and traction. Unfortunately, one of the things that was disrupted was the U.S. Census Bureau's 2020 American Community Survey, a key source of data. Today, we'll fast forward, there are 24 partner states utilizing the ALICE or Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed Framework. These statistics and tools are used across the country to inform policy, advocate, and drive innovation. Late in 2021, Aloha United Way and Hawaii Community Foundation partnered to lead the 2022-24 ALICE cohort. 17 nonprofits working collectively to advance ALICE. We were dependent, though, on the report and the data and the information, and because of the disruption, we weren't able to get where we wanted to be. So, moving aside the U.S. Census Bureau's 2020 American Community Survey, we decided to ask and pursue another report. So a survey of Hawaii residents was commissioned through Anthology Research, a Hawaii-based professional research firm, between July and September 2022. Not only was it one of the largest surveys of its kind, 2,391 residents responded. The report actually provides a never-before-seen look into ALICE households. This report links resident responses to the 2019 Hawaii Financial Health Pulse Survey developed by the Financial Health Network and sponsored by Bank of Hawaii and Hawaii Community Foundation, but it also builds on prior research. ALICE has become the common metric here in Hawaii. As a community, we are using ALICE as a frame of reference. It has become a standard in business, government, and nonprofit work, and we all utilize the ALICE framework because it provides a foundation for understanding and action. This level of awareness and acceptance is unique to Hawaii. When you talk about ALICE here, people understand what you're saying. And as a community, we have committed to this work. And as of 2022, 17 nonprofits and the rest of the community will be depending on the information that we're going to provide here today. So, we're about ready to get started, and I would like to introduce our panelists. We have Micah Kane, CEO and President of the Hawaii Community Foundation, Peter Ho, Chairman, President and CEO of Bank of Hawaii, John Fink, President, CEO of Aloha United Way, and Kimo Carvalho, Aloha United Way, Vice President of Community Impact. And if you have not had a chance to check in or you have not received a press kit, please visit the desk out in the front. We will open the floor for questions following the presentation. The full report is available online at auw.org, so you can visit there, and the recording of the press conference will be available later today at that same website, auw.org. And I would like Peter to go ahead and lead us off. Thank you, Peter.
Great, Carolyn, thank you so much, and thank you all for being here today as we do the big reveal on some interesting information. Bank of Hawaii's journey with Alice goes back, as Carolyn alluded to, just over 5 years now. And it was AUW and Community Foundation that came to us asking if we would support an initiative to really try to understand the community more broadly than just kind of the traditional poverty line, and whether there was broader challenge within the community. What we found was quite alarming and startling. And I'm really, we're really gratified to have been part of this journey for the past 5 years, as I think, as Carolyn described, the term Alice and the methodology behind Alice, the meaning of Alice, I think is populated through certainly policymakers, through businesses, through the community as a whole. And while that's a terrific thing, taking on a pretty ominous challenge, I think the jumping off point for us now, as you'll see from the data here shortly, is one of action and bold action and swift action. And so I believe that today is a way to help demonstrate to the broader community that has really embraced the notion of Alice, that there's a greater need for us to be not only active, but more active, be more bold, and take swifter action. And I think you'll find that in the data that Kimo's going to share with you in a second now. So Carol, back to you.
Thank you. Yes, and before Kimo gets into the data, there are some key terms. If you'll just glance at the screens, household survival budget. You can really think about this in terms of the Alice threshold. So the household survival budget is the bare minimum cost of basic necessities. So when you think about this is housing, childcare, food, transportation, healthcare, a basic smartphone plan, and taxes. Costs vary by household composition, which makes sense. The average household survival budget in Hawaii for a single adult is just over $35,000. And this is based on current data, so this has been adjusted for inflation. This is 2022 data. The cost for a family of 4 adults, the composition is 2 adults, 1 infant, 1 preschooler, is more than $100,000. Alice, to move forward, it's of course an acronym for asset limited, income constrained, employed, but households with income needed to afford the household survival budget. That's Alice. Households below the Alice threshold are unable to make ends meet and include both Alice and poverty level households. The poverty line that we're looking at right now, these are households earning below the federal poverty level, which in Hawaii equates to $15,630 for a single person household and $31,920 for a 4-person household. Kimo, go ahead and take us through the data.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kimo Carvalho. I'm the Vice President of Community Impact. This morning, I have the privilege of sharing with you the data. So first and foremost, our first key findings. In 2018, our Alice study had showed that 42% of households were below the Alice threshold, otherwise known as a survival budget, that Carolyn just mentioned. This year, however, in 2022, that number has increased to 44% of households below the threshold, which, based on today's population estimates, about 634,000 individuals. The significant news to share with everyone, however, is that while more households and individuals fell below the Alice threshold, What is more disappointing is that many of those who were already either in ALICE or above the ALICE threshold have actually fallen into poverty. It's about a 66% increase since 2018 in the wrong direction. In 2018, the poverty rate was 9%. Today in 2022, the poverty rate is 15%, and that is 1 in 7 households throughout the state of Hawaii with an income below the federal poverty line. For a single adult, that comes out to $15,630, and for a household of 4, that's $31,920. So that's the significant story that's coming out of today. This graph breaks down that 44% below the ALICE threshold into 2 subpopulations, those who are ALICE and those who are below the federal poverty line. And based on our 2018 ALICE study, that reflected 33% were ALICE. In 2022, that number has decreased to 29%. But as I just mentioned, unfortunately, in 2018, 9% of our population was at the poverty line, and now it's increased to 15%. Since the Great Recession of 2008, we've been really trying to call attention to the fact that it just really takes one emergency to tip someone over into poverty, and that tipping point for us was the pandemic. It was a significant event that just had negative consequences at a population level. Not all groups throughout the report were impacted equally. There are significant disparities in terms of counties. Maui County saw the largest increase in poverty. In 2018, that rate was 6%, and now it's 16%. So that's about 100, well, that's been the most significant jump of any other county. And just for Maui County, in case you're wondering, I did double check, and actually the ALICE population was at 36% in 2018, so that stayed static. In terms of ethnic disparities, we see that Native Hawaiians and Filipinos are more likely to be below the ALICE threshold than any other ethnicities. Moving on into the next set of key findings. This next set was, what made this study very significant was the partnership with the Financial Health Network. For the first time, it provided us with a new and different lens of looking at the ALICE population. The 2019 Financial Health Pulse Survey was commissioned by Bank of Hawaii. It looks at 4 different indicators: spending, savings, borrowing, and financial planning. Providing that level of insight really took us into a new, deeper dive into understanding the financial behaviors of our population. As it relates to these key findings, 84% of households below the ALICE threshold have a combined annual household income of $75,000 or less, which is basically equivalent to 2 full-time wage earners earning $18 an hour. And what this tells us is that $18 an hour really is the baseline. If you are a household earning less than $75,000, the tools that we're deploying to really help mobilize our population are not going to work as effectively. And so what this, and then in terms of debt, which is the second box there, this study showed us that 3 in 4 Hawaii households are carrying debt, and 1 in 3 below the ALICE threshold are owing more than what is actually manageable. And so this next slide here reinforces that 1 in 3 of those below the ALICE threshold has more debt than they can actually manage. But what's also showing us, which I think is very fascinating, is that the majority of our Hawaii residents are actually carrying a lot of debt. Debt is often an early indicator into downward spirals. In our line of work, it's often an opportunity to intervene, also with very few resources to prevent financial hardship. Without prevention here with debt, this usually leads to overdrafts, collection, bad credit scores, financial stress. Basically, it has a lot of compounding negative impacts to one's well-being. In terms of covering expenses, in 2019, based on the Financial Health Survey, we saw that Hawaii residents had actually a pretty sufficient savings to cover at minimum 3 months of living expenses. This 2022 study is showing that for those below the ALICE threshold, nearly half of households would be able to cover 2 months worth of expenses or less based on the money that they currently have available today. When we actually broke down that data even further, 1 in 4 households below the ALICE threshold would only have enough money to cover expenses for about 4 weeks. What this tells us is that Hawaii residents overall, since 2019, even those above the ALICE threshold, they are lacking a financial cushion to actually face either an emergency or deal with another economic downturn. As far as covering expenses, one of the questions that we did ask in the survey was if the respondents were able to cover a $400 emergency. Of those who responded, those with the means to do so were more likely to withdraw cash or put their expenses on credit. Households below the ALICE threshold, they are significantly more likely to have to pay for expenses over time, either through credit cards, borrowing money from family or friends, or selling something for cash. Were often the behaviors that we found. In terms of coping with financial debt, of those who are spending equal to or more than their income in the last 12 months, 2/3 are turning to their savings, their credit, to basically manage their financial situations. And based on past research from the Financial Health Survey, it's showing that these rates are higher than since pre-pandemic times. Financially, what caught our eye in this survey, or in this particular segment of the survey, there's actually some significant increases in behaviors here, particularly more people are selling items for cash. They're also borrowing more from family and friends, and more people are overdrawing on their bank accounts. And just to maybe put a finer point on this, when the concern about borrowing from family and friends, we knew that from the Financial Health Survey in 2019, that was a behavior. What is more concerning now, however, is that there is a compounding impact on those family and friends. So there is this, is putting them at risk in terms of having a domino effect of crises. Moving on to credit, in the last slide, we shared with you that when spending outpaces income, 39% of Hawaii residents were more likely to overdraw their bank accounts. With debt prevention, this can negatively impact one's credit, as we know. The high risk to overdraft within a community that is dealing with a housing crisis, however, is that households with damaged credit, they are finding it more difficult to obtain jobs. When you're applying for a rental unit, you have to oftentimes do a background check, and that credit score does come up then. It also is something you have to use when you're starting up your utilities. So the damaged credit can actually have even further of an effect on one's personal health and well-being and financial situations. Also with low credit scores, it's preventing them from access to low-cost credit. We are seeing, of course, with inflation, basically they're spending a lot more. So that's ultimately, when you have bad credit, you're going to have higher cost credit. You're going to have to spend more on your credit card bills, plus you're already spending more with inflation. So spending is just very high. In terms of financial assets, this is the last section of the Financial Health Network. Just to wrap this part up, when it comes to financial planning, we as a system, we're not doing a good job at looking beyond immediate needs when it comes to financial planning. This study, what it really showed us is that those below the ALICE threshold are significantly less likely to use basic financial services such as checking and savings account, credit, insurance, retirement accounts. When we look at just our financial literacy programs, we're not seeing strong progress in terms of long-term financial planning. That is definitely an area that we can improve on and look to. The third and final set of key findings, this report not only looked at the core financial health of Hawaii households, we also looked at structural disparities and the well-being of our ALICE population. In terms of the ALICE population, so this slide here shows you that you are more likely to be below the ALICE threshold if you are Native Hawaiian or Filipino, if you have children, if you live in a multi-generational household, if you do not have a college degree or a trade certification, if you're struggling paying taxes on time, if you have insufficient income, especially if your annual household income is less than $75,000, and if you have inconsistent work opportunities such as multiple jobs. The Financial Health Network shared that those with one steady paycheck are 1.7 times more likely to be financially healthy than those with a stable paycheck. And then going into the final set, those below the ALICE threshold were significantly more likely to experience these challenges during the pandemic. What was really interesting is mental health, paying off debts and household expenses, and facing situations such as childcare. As we all know, a lot of people struggled to find childcare during the pandemic. These were experiences, of course, during the pandemic, but what is more significant is that despite our community coming out of the pandemic, many of these challenges are persisting, particularly those with that are below the ALICE threshold. And these lasting impacts are similar to what we saw during the Great Recession. So it is a new set of data here that we think is significant and worth calling out. And this, as you read the report, this is a larger section. In terms of, this is the last, I believe it's the last slide, yeah. So by county, you can see the top lasting concerns for Hawaii residents. Here, 1 in 4 people across the state of Hawaii continue to struggle with mental health challenges, particularly as it relates to stress and anxiety regarding their finances. For Honolulu and Big Island, mental health were the top lasting concerns. It continues to be the lasting concern. What was the only outlier here was the County of Kauai. They are showing that their lasting concern comes down to health conditions. And if you guys saw the news last night, what we're seeing is that because of the pandemic, there was a lot of delayed health care. And so what we're seeing is, unfortunately, an uptick and high demand for health care, particularly in neighbor island counties. And we believe that's part of that story as well. So those are our key findings for this 2022 ALICE report. These at the high level. And I'll now pass it on to Micah.
Actually, we're going to just pass that on to John.
Sorry.
Go ahead, John.
Thank you. Thanks, Kimo. Sobering information. I'm sure not many of you are shocked by these numbers, but I think what we need to point out again today is these are real people. These are not just statistics on a piece of paper. Over 620,000 local residents are affected by this, including more than ever, over 80,000, or I'm sorry, 200,000 are now, over 200,000 are now in the poverty level. It's an astounding figure that we have to deal with going forward. And just to be clear, this was exacerbated by COVID. This was not caused by COVID, but it was exacerbated. So these people have found a way to survive. They have borrowed from friends and family. They cannot continue to do that. They cannot continue to dip into savings accounts and, of course, 401ks. That will have a ripple effect for 20 years for some of these people if they choose to do that. So what is next? We need to take this data, we need to take this information, we need to enhance the partnerships we have with government, with social services, and with the business community. We need to look at this as a today problem, not a kick the can down the road problem that we can just kind of let fester for 5 more years. People who were getting help paying rent, that's gone. People who were getting help with utility assistance, that's pretty much gone. People who were getting PPP money and some companies that were able to survive with the pandemic, that's gone. The government is no longer sending checks to every adult or child in a household, that's gone. So we are out of the pandemic, knock on wood, to a large degree, even though it's still around, of course. But we need to figure out ways to help people out and help them out soon. This is a drain on not only these people, and Kimo mentioned the mental health issues, it's also a drain on our entire system. So one of the nice things I would say today is we are not alone in this. There are 24 other entities or 23 other entities, states around the country, including the District of Columbia, that have a lot of research and a lot of work that's been done in ALICE. We need to find out what's working, and we need to avoid what's not working. We need to take some of the surplus the state currently has and put it to good use immediately to help these people raise their level of existence and hopefully never fall back down again. That's a win. So those are some of the things that we need to do, and we need to do it with partners. And without partners, we cannot do this alone. So with that, I would like to introduce one of our great partners at Aloha United Way, who has helped us throughout this process and going forward, along with Bank of Hawaii and the Bank of Hawaii Foundation. And that's the Hawaii Community Foundation, and President and CEO Micah Kane. So Micah.
Mahalo, John, and thank you for all the comments earlier. I'm an optimist, and I think we're actually in a really good position right now to execute on some very important work. I want to take us back chronologically to get to the point I want to make in at least my time here. As Peter stated, back in 2017, when the group came together to really make ALICE a critical data point for us, we learned at that point how powerful the notion of common data, shared goals, collective action could be. It took us to the 2017-2018 Hawaii Executive Conference, where Peter, in a business environment primarily, informed our business community of the importance of this data point and the relevance it had to their employees in our community. 2 years later, it led to a 2020 legislative session, of which at that time Finance Chair Sylvia Luke, now Lieutenant Governor Sylvia Luke, helped lead a coalition of public sector, private sector, and nonprofit community leaders to come up with a package of bills to address the three primary areas that ALICE was trying to address: income inequality, child care, and affordable housing. And we went collectively to the 2020 legislative session with 3 sets of packages of bill to address those issues. Unfortunately, in February, March of 2020, we got hit by the pandemic. There was a mishmash of policy activities that occurred through broken legislative sessions. But through that, we did get some legislation passed. Act 46 was passed, which established the framework for universal preschools and the framework for the introduction of incremental increases to the minimum wage that was endorsed by all 4 chambers of commerce were passed, and some funding for affordable housing. And so you started to see what a common data point could do. It helped us create some shared goals that then we sit today at a point in time where it's upon us to have collective action. You saw in the last legislative session where $200 million was allocated towards the first increment of child care classrooms to be put forth. Those are real dollars that are now upon us that we need to execute on. And then you saw $1 billion of affordable housing funding, $600 million that went to the classification that we saw needing it the most, the Department of Homelands. If you looked at the data, you saw that that's where the biggest crisis sits in the Native Hawaiian community, along with the Filipino community. And so we have some assets and some investments that we need to execute on. And I think we got to recognize that what it's going to look like in the next year or 2 as we try to do that. First and foremost, it's going to be messy, right? And there's going to be a desire by some of us to point fingers at one another at who's not performing. And we can't do that. We need to stay united as a community. Those areas that are faulty, we need to pick them up. And we need to continue to come together as a community and as leaders to make sure that we can execute on these assets. We've been given a great opportunity, and I want to challenge us to stay united around that. When you look across the country, we have the benefit, many of us, Peter does, John does, we have counterparts where we see what's being done across the country. No state has the benefit that we have, where we've mainstreamed a common data point that have allowed us to be united around the performance around one data point. That is an extremely important competitive advantage that we have to remain united around. I just want to challenge us to continue to do that. I want to thank Peter and his leadership, John and your leadership, and Kamehameha Schools, who's not present here, and others in the private sector who have really stood up. And I also want to acknowledge our nonprofit partners. They go unrecognized, so I want to thank you for that. Wow.
Thank you again, Micah. And I do want to bring your attention to this particular slide. You'll note that some of the items are in all 3 columns. This really underscores the need for cross-sector cooperation, financial stability and savings, or programs, policies, and partnerships. This is really the call to action as we move forward as a group. And to also underscore Micah's point, Hawaii, out of the 24 partner states in the United for ALICE movement, we are the only state to put out a new report in 2022. So I'd like to open it up for questions, and also note that David Pettinger is here from Anthology Research Group, and he will be able to answer any questions regarding methodology and how the report was put together. Okay, I will open it up for questions.
Yeah, Kimo, I believe it was you who stressed the importance of long-term financial planning. How do we do that when things are so uncertain?
Sure. In the financial health survey in 2019, one of the recommendations was to actually utilize the workforce as a leverage point to do financial planning. One of our 17 ALICE grantees is doing just that, PACT, Parents and Children Together. They're actually partnering with human resource departments. They're using that leverage point to actually look at what your benefits package, including your salary is, and they're actually bringing outside benefits to actually maximize opportunities to take advantage of whatever financial help they can. And they're actually using that as a moment to look long term in terms of their employment status. And what we're seeing even in that example is higher retention, stronger relationships within the workforce. So it's examples like that that we're investing in terms of long-term financial planning. A lot of our grantees are also managing what we call financial opportunity centers with financial coaches. Think of it as a financial planner. In the private sector, we oftentimes have financial planners that help us with consulting on assets, investments and such. Sort of the same thing, just in more of a nonprofit drop-in center capacity. So I think this is one area. It's not just financial literacy and education. It really is financial coaching and mentoring and seeing a little bit more long-term in terms of what your financial health could be.
Just one other thing I'll add on that. 20 states in this country mandate that you cannot graduate high school without having some sort of course or a couple of weeks of studying on basic economics. They mandate that. We are not one of those states that does, but if you want to start early, you start when people are 15 or 16 years old. You teach them the basics. At least they'll have a working knowledge of it when they get out into the real world.
Yeah, just to jump on what John just said, basic economics would help us illuminate the fact that financial planning is only possible when the community, people in our community, have the ability to create savings, to create positive cash flow. So yes, we need great planning devices, capabilities, resources, but fundamentally we need to get more people away from a negative cash flow position, a dis-savings position, into a position of savings through things like affordable housing, the ability to put their keiki in safe places so they can go out and earn a better living. That's, I think that's a foundational element of financial planning to begin with.
There was that slide earlier that talked about like if you're below the ALICE threshold, then you are likely to, for example, be Hawaiian or like have children and stuff. And there was one thing that seemed interesting to me that it was like 84% have insufficient income. What was the other 16%? Is it just like living above means or something?
Is this what you're looking at? To have insufficient income, 84% have combined annual household income of less than $75,000, well below the median. Yes. Did you want to take that, Timo? No?
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Yeah, so the question is like, who are the other 16%? Because I think I would have expected that to be closer to like 100% or something for the insufficient income.
So this is so these are those who are below the ALICE threshold. So what this is showing you is that 84% of those below the ALICE threshold have insufficient income. So you can still, the ALICE threshold, that is your household survival budget, and that can differ based on the composition of the household. We don't have what all those compositions are currently. That's going to be available in April 2023. So they fall probably above $75,000, but within that survival threshold.
It's the upper crust of the ALICE community.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Sabrina.
Hi. So I think we've talked a lot about like a higher level policy changes. But how do we get to people who maybe don't understand what being part of the ALICE community is? They don't understand that they can fall into it. Maybe people who, they're borrowing money from friends, they're overdrawing their accounts. They don't really grasp this concept that there is help and can't use it. How do you get to that person?
Would you like to take that? Kim?
Could you restate the
Yeah,
question?
here, sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Am I just too quiet? I guess I'm curious to understand, how do we get to the actual Alice person who maybe is stubborn or somebody who doesn't really understand or grasp the concept that they're in this cycle. So maybe borrowing money from friends, they sort of, this is just their lifestyle. Like, how do we actually reach that person?
Some of this is intervention and awareness.
Got it. When I speak to our 17 ALICE grantees, outreach and connecting with our ALICE population is actually one of their largest struggles, for the reasons that you just mentioned. It's hard to self-assess and become self-aware of some of the behaviors that puts you at high risk based on what we shared. That's completely understandable. What I can say is what they do is they leverage the touch points that they currently have. They develop relationships with communities. It takes a lot of education, a lot of awareness, and a lot of direct outreach. A lot of those that our ALICE households, ALICE grantees are connecting with are our grantees who, are our populations who are already direct service clients. Sometimes they refer, but this is definitely one of the struggles, and I think hopefully you, the media, can help us with that awareness to make everyone aware who that ALICE is. A socioeconomic classification that, based on these insights, if you fall within this risk category, perhaps it's time to assess and see if taking a step towards a solution is feasible.
I think also, Sabrina, two things. Number one, I think what you have is people don't know where to go for help. I think that was part of your question. I think we need to do a better job making sure through all of our resources that we tell people there is help out there, and then we have to overcome that natural human instinct of pride. People don't want to ask for help. They don't want it. We've had people call Aloha United Way's 211 line during COVID, and they said, I used to lead the workplace campaign at my workplace to raise money for charity. I need help now. Very tough phone call for somebody to make, but the reality in which we live. So we need people to understand there is no shame in that. Getting help for yourself, getting better educated, figuring out possible solutions for you and your family is a brilliant move, not a sign of weakness in any way. We need more people to understand that and ask for the help because it is out there.
And oftentimes,
I think your question is very important, and I think you're hitting it square on the head. There's 2 points. I think there's two target markets in that. One, the people we're trying to serve, which is I think what John is addressing, and then it's the general public around an awareness of this. I think the caution that I get concerned about is that if we're not effective in communicating the roadmap to reducing the cost of living in Hawaii, which I think we can do, the pressure falls to wages. And we will never wage increase ourselves out of this catastrophic cost structure right now. And by shifting the focus to wages is immediately dividing our community. And we need those employers leaning in. And that concerns me a lot because that's what I see happening right now. We're trying to drive wages over and above the cost structure that's just not possible. It is completely not possible. We've got to accept that, and we've got to focus on the cost of living, and we've got to bring down the cost of housing, and we've got to eliminate child care as a cost burden to low-income families so that they can get back to work and have the income that John and Peter are talking about. And we as a community need to resonate on those points and not let those outlier voices divide us on what we're trying to get done.
One of the things to keep in mind when people ask us as we do ALICE, and as Carolyn mentioned, next year everybody else will be doing the ALICE report, and we will have a new ALICE report. The reason that there was no ALICE report in 2022, because it's supposed to be every 2 years, was due to problems with COVID and getting people to answer questions and the census issues that the country had trying to get just the census done. So when we learned about that, we got a partner in Peter and the bank to say, we'll help fund it now because we can't wait another year. But I will tell you that when someone asks me, what would you consider success? in all of this. Certainly moving people up in the ALICE ladder, because remember, the ALICE is this big, right? You're talking over 600,000 people. There are people who are one bad break away from being in poverty, and there are people who might be able to break through. So certainly moving people up. But as someone pointed out to me, and to Micah's point, if we don't make some moves now, we might find out the next time we do a survey or in 2025 or whatever, that we have fewer people in ALICE. That won't be a celebration. We might also find out they've all moved out of the state of Hawaii. And that's what we're seeing, obviously, with some of the immigration we have right now, is that people have decided, I love Hawaii, but it doesn't work. So we need to be careful.
For 4 straight years.
4 straight years.
4 straight years.
And just one last point, in terms of what John just mentioned, in terms of the ladder, one of the things that distinguishes someone from ALICE and that of poverty is, for those in ALICE, they're struggling paycheck to paycheck, but they often don't qualify for financial benefits. So because they're not thinking in that mindset, because I don't qualify for those benefits, I'm not in trouble, that might, but yet they're still struggling. So that's often one of those distinguishing reasons why there's this mindset of I don't want to seek help personally. Yes, there's those system issues, but on an individual basis, that direct engagement to pursue options, it really is a mindset shift that we're going to have to work on.
One of the issues that we're dealing with is something called the benefits cliff. Is being dealt with all over the country, but basically, to put it in a nutshell, if someone is earning X amount of money, they qualify for SNAP money or child credit or healthcare benefits. If they were to get a raise at work, which might give them, let's say it's an extra $1 an hour, which would be a 5 or 6% increase if they're making $18 an hour. That would be an extra $2,000 a year they would earn. In doing so, it would put them over the benefits cliff where they no longer would be able to receive $500 a month in child care or food stamps or whatever the case may be. It then becomes important for them to say, I lose if I take that raise, because the benefits cliff does not go like this, where it's a graded system where if you earn more, you get less, but you still get something. You go from basically getting something to getting nothing. So that is something else that needs to be dealt with and can be dealt with on a local level.
So some of this does deal with financial stability and savings programs in terms of building safety net supports for ALICE households to be able to navigate short-term setbacks because they are not, the vast majority are not eligible to receive additional supports or funding. They essentially make too much money. That is why one of the approaches is to build in more supports to navigate those short-term setbacks, those unexpected expenses and those losses. In addition to that, though, more widespread and equitable access to financial services and credit, and then also to address just unmanageable debt to begin with. So, are there any more questions?
I have a small clarifying question, and I think you might have already answered it a little bit, but you mentioned, Kimo mentioned like the idea of the financial literacy education and how in the long term it actually didn't have that much of an effect. Is that just because a lot of the problem comes down to like insufficient income coming in? Like what is the reason, I guess, that the education part doesn't work in the long term?
So what I was referencing came from the Financial Health Network 2019 survey. What we saw out of that survey was a recommendation that beyond just financial literacy and education, we need more financial planning. So I don't think there was any maybe deeper dive into the why that you're asking. I can share with you the Financial Health Network 2019 study though, just so you can see the language. Their recommendation though was longer term financial planning. And that's been something that we at least as a team here have been investing in terms of our ALICE cohort grantees.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us. Again, the recording too of the press conference will be available at aew.org, and I would like to thank everyone, including all of our panelists here today. Thank Hawaii Foundation, Hawaii Community Foundation, the the Financial Health Network, Anthology Research Group, United for ALICE, everyone that really contributed to putting this study together and to putting us on the path forward. Thank you.